Now, a close relative of the false cause fallacy is called the slippery slope fallacy. And I like to be careful when discussing the slippery slope fallacy because a lot of people become, when studying fallacies, they become fallacy name droppers. And they'll say, oh, such and such fallacy, and then just walk away as if just because they've identified that there seems to be some sort of fallacy pattern that's happening, there's clearly a bad argument happening. And I see that a lot with slippery slope. And first of all, let's talk about why slippery slope arguments tend to be persuasive. And this goes back to some things we talked about earlier, which is some fallacy patterns follow good argument patterns. So again, if you remember us discussing good argument forms, there was something called the hypothetical syllogism, which said if you had if A then B as one premise, and you had if B then C as a second premise, you could conclude so if A then C. And what people often do is they'll say, well, see, this leads to that, this leads to that, so therefore, if we do this, we're going to get this. Usually they combine it with the little modus tollens and say, we don't want C, so therefore we should never start doing A. The reason I want to be careful about this is because some slippery slopes do materialize. Sometimes the links in the chain of a long hypothetical syllogism are strong. So, for instance, if you have a long line of dominoes lined up about an inch or so apart, and you flip the first one, you can conclude that the last one's going to fall. And basically the inference is, well, if the first one falls, the second one will, and if the second one will, the third one will, and if the third one will, the fourth one will. And even though it's not guaranteed that that will happen, you have a high degree of confidence that by knocking over the first domino, the last one will fall. Other types of connections are not so clear, and maybe there are a lot of other variables that take place. Again, a quintessential example is from when there were arguments about going into the Vietnam War. People argued that, well, if Vietnam falls to communism, then this country will, and if this country will, then that one will, and if this one will, then that one will, and eventually it'll be the United States against the entire world, so we've got to stop things from happening in Vietnam. Now, there are a lot more variables involved in geopolitical circumstances than are involved in dominoes falling. So that probably wasn't a real strong argument, one where just because, or even if you granted the premises, that the conclusion would likely follow. So be careful when engaging in or calling out something as a slippery slope. Maybe the argument is stronger than it initially appears, but a lot of times people reason poorly because there's something that's psychologically persuasive about a slippery slope pattern.